Hello and welcome to another Home Inspector MD video. So, what in the world are all these odd numbers, markings, and acronyms printed all over a circuit breaker? Well, it's a lot more information than you can imagine. So let's decipher their hidden meaning today. The most basic information on any brand of breaker is type. When you buy a breaker at the retail store, the first thing the employee asks you is what brand of breaker you need, such as Square D, Siemens, or Eaton. The type is the manufacturer brand line. I'll give you an example. QO is Square D. NC or NA is Federal Pioneer. Then there's the Siemens Q series. A CHOM is a Canadian Home Line, or a BR is Eaton. This is usually found at the front of the breaker. Next is the UL or CSA listed logo. These logos represent the American or Canadian electrical standards. So if you see these logos on an electrical product, you can feel some comfort that the electrical product has gone through proper testing for safety. Now, there are other standards out there these days, such as ETL, but no proper Canadian breaker from a manufacturer has used ETL. Also, if you're in Canada, avoid buying UL listed only breakers that are sold here. Then there's the use only on listed enclosures tagline on the side of the breaker. Now, what does this mean? Well, the electrical breaker manufacturers produce breakers for its own brand of panels. So it makes sense that they only CSA or UL certify their own brand of breakers in their panels. Some brands of breakers cannot physically fit in other brands of panels. The Square DQO and Federal Pioneer breakers are prime examples. But Siemens, Eaton, and Homeline breaker brands share the same design connection so they can physically fit on each other's panels. The use only on listed enclosures quote is not only telling the customer it should not be installed on the other brands, but they are also telling you that they are not liable if it results in a fire or harm to people. This should be a warning that insurance companies will not be kind to people with the wrong branded breakers in their panel if something happens. Next, you should see a temperature on the breaker itself of 40 degrees Celsius. Now, what does that mean? Well, that temperature reading is not the conductor, but the maximum ambient temperature around which the breaker is installed. Now, in most cases here in Canada, your panel is going to be installed in the basement where it's cooler, and we're not allowed to install a panel outside. So this isn't going to affect most Canadians. If, however, you live in the south, where temperatures are much hotter, panels installed outside or there is no basement, then the story may be different. In very hot climates, with ambient temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius around the panel, it's possible there could be nuisance tripping of the breaker, even though there does not appear to be a problem with the circuit itself. SWD. Now, some breakers will have the acronym SWD on them. Now, what does that mean? Well, SWD stands for switching duty rated. You may see this on single pole 15 and 20 amp breakers, and it means that those breakers are suitable for switching 120 volt fluorescent lighting loads on and off. HARC. Some breakers will have HARC stamped on them. This acronym means that the breaker is suitable for use for heating, air conditioning, and refrigeration. Now, most breakers will have this label as it covers a wide variety of single and double pole breakers for these applications. Date codes. Date codes are important to know if there is a recall on a breaker, so you know which one is affected. Older breakers, such as this Federal Pioneer breaker, were stamped on the label. Usually the number stamped on the breaker will represent the year and what week it was manufactured. Here, we see an older Square D breaker with a letter coded of LP instead of numbers. Unfortunately, you will need a chart to decipher these codes for square D. On newer square D, QO, and homeline breakers, they are now etched into the breaker itself. You can find it beside the handle here. The first two digits are the year, and the second set is the week number. Other possible locations for other breakers would be something like the barcode label or the side. Look for either a 4 or even 6-digit number. Wire size. For standard 15 amp single pole breakers, you would see something like this. This shows the wire sizes that this breaker terminal will accept. AWG is American wire gauge. ALCU means the breaker can accept either aluminum or copper wire. Of course, different amperage breakers will show you a different wire size range on its breaker. To put this in context, here is a chart showing the amperage of a standard breaker and the required wire size for that breaker. Now, close to the wire gauge size, you should see another temperature number. In this case, 60 and 75 degrees Celsius. Now, what does this mean? Well, this means the terminal of the breaker accepts two temperature and insulation ratings of 60 and 75 degrees for the conductor. The dual temperature ratings apply to the different insulation types of conductors. For example, most commonly used wires in the home are rated for 60 degrees Celsius. Next, we have the torque required. In the case of breakers, it's the amount of force required on the breaker screw to properly tighten the wire. The argument here is that you don't want the wire too loose, resulting in arcing, or too tight to crush the wire. This number is shown in inch-pounds. For our 40 amp square D breaker here, it shows 45 inch-pounds. You may also see an M number. This shows 5 Nm. This is the unit of torque as measured in Newton meters. Now, you do need a special screwdriver that will allow you to turn the screw until you reach the desired number on the breaker. Interrupting rating. All circuit breakers will have this number listed on the breaker. Here we have 10,000 amps as the interrupting rating of the breaker. So what does this mean? This is the maximum fault current of a breaker that it can safely interrupt or open. If you have a condition such as a short circuit, the breaker would not open the circuit immediately. After all, it's a mechanical device. For a very brief moment, that breaker will experience a very high amperage. And as long as that amperage is below 10,000 amps, then the breaker will still function. But above that number, the breaker may experience a catastrophic failure. Double tapping. When inspecting the electrical system in a house, the home inspector will report any time we see double tapping of a breaker. That's because putting two wires into one terminal lug may result in a loose or bad connection. The reason people do this is because either their panel is already full and cannot install a new breaker, or they're just lazy. However, some breakers may have something like this diagram on their breakers. This squared E2O breaker was made so that you can install two conductors on both ends of the terminal safely. And one final thing, if you are unsure how much wire to strip when connecting wires to a breaker, then some breakers will tell you the ideal length of wire to strip on the breaker itself, as shown here. That concludes our look at all the hidden meanings on a circuit breaker. And I bet you never thought there was that much information extracted from a circuit breaker. Well, if you find the information here useful, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. And think about us for your next home inspection. Hey, you want more videos such as this one? Check these out.